G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you, and of course we have some amazing news from Nikon. Not one firmware, not two firmware, but three firmwares. Is that a real word? I'm not sure. But not only that, an absolutely out of left field piece of hardware. Before we jump into that, I just have to make a quick announcement from Matt Irwin Photography. Yes, this is the end of lease sale call out. This very space here that we've been for 8 years, our lease is up and it's time to find new opportunities. So we are looking for what's next. So come on down. Now, Mark, what days were again? Friday
the 22nd of April and Saturday the 23rd of April.
Written right here. So come on down. Everything's half price, but you have to come and buy it yourself. You have to be here. We're not going to post it. Everything must go, but you're going to get some crazy Matt Irwin deals. We're still here. Everything else is happening. The print shop is still open. The printer is still whirring. Online orders are still going. Everything is exactly the same. It's just our bricks and mortar is moving from A to B. We don't know what B is yet. We're still working on it, but we're still here. So don't forget mattirwin.com. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Maybe you should subscribe right now and click on the bell. Don't forget Instagram. I will get back and do some things on Instagram. Everything else is business as usual, but come on down to our end of lease sale. This is the man that's been behind the scenes for all of these years. He does a lot of the editing that you see.
Yes.
He's looked after this space for 3.5 years, but Mark and I, we've known each other since, like, I don't know, 2005, so it's almost 20 years.
It's a very long time, very long time.
So we've gone through a lot of chapters, and this is just another chapter, and we're looking forward to whatever the next chapter is.
Yes, yes. It's always an adventure, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you. Thank you for letting me look after this place for the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, I mean, half of it we're in lockdown,
yeah,
but you know, whatever.
Hey, it was great working from home.
Small detail.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's been great working here from home. Okay, now to firmware. G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you, and you know why we're here in this part of the video. Yes, indeed, it is to talk about the Z9 and its 2.0 update. And before we jump into that, I want to talk about three other things. We've had firmware updates for the Z6 II, the Z7 II, as well as a hardware announcement like nothing else that we've ever seen from Nikon before. That is coming after the firmware 2.0. So let's quickly talk about the Z6 II and the Z7 II. These are focus updates, and if you jump onto the Nikon page, you can see exactly what they're addressing. This is firmware update 1.4. The big headline news is this stupendously large update from Nikon for the Z9, this 2.0 update. It's so huge and there's so much stuff, and I suspect it'll take a long time for us all to unpack it. A shout out to my friends Seth and Ricci. They've both done 2 great videos which you should check out. This update is coming out on April 20th, so that is very close. And then we can install it and all find out how awesome it is. In this video, really, I just want to talk about some of the headline features. As we can see from Ricci's video, there is so much going on in here, and some of us would even consider this almost like a brand new camera. This is such an enormous firmware update, but it's free and it'll be here in less than a week. Now, I think one of the most interesting updates for the Z9 is burst, pre-burst and post-burst. And what that is it will actually capture frames when you acquire focus, half press or back button press, and it will start collecting frames then. And it will do a second before you do a full shutter release, up to a second beforehand, and it'll do up to 4 seconds from when you finish shooting. Now, this is an incredible thing. I don't believe we've seen it before in a camera of this many megapixels, full frame, and so on. So this is an astonishing feature to have. Now, of course, some of you may have already picked up that this is only happening in the JPEG formats, in both the 30 frames per second, which is full 45 megapixels, the 120 frames per second, which is 11 megapixels, still gives you the full frame. Now, I'm in two minds as to whether this is a good or a bad thing. Obviously, having it in the 20 frames per second raw shooting mode would be better, But if you think about, I suppose, where it might be most useful, which is sports, photojournalism, and I suppose, yes, it could be considered useful in wildlife as well. A lot of places where it's sports and photojournalism, JPEG may well be the standard file that you're using, and then you're just filing it off to a newspaper and so on. Obviously, it would be great to have it in 20 frames per second RAW as well. This is something that Nikon has not done yet. Who knows, perhaps it will come in a future update. And also included in this update is some actual AF tracking improvements. So for example, bird in flight improvements. Now, I have heard murmurs on the internet, in my comments, people saying, oh, it's still not as good as the A1 and the R3. Well, I don't know, I haven't tested them side by side. Perhaps if this is the case, this has been addressed, and who knows, it may even be better. I'm not sure it even matters at this point because these cameras are all so ridiculous, but I believe there are AF tracking improvements. Custom area AF, so there's potentially sort of 20 permutations of boxes. You can just ask the focus system to be drawing a box in those particular areas. All the focus modes still work, so you might have eye tracking or whatever you've got going on, it will still work in that very small area, but you can now customize those areas. This is something I believe first appeared in the D6, and I'm sure it's even more refined here in the Z9. Now, for those who want to do an exposure and they want to just know how long they've been doing their long exposure for, there is actually now a timer that counts up 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So you now have that type of timer when you press the shutter button. Good for astro, but who knows what other applications it can be used for. As I'm the type of person who likes to use specifications of lenses and cameras differently to how they're traditionally imagined, I'll see what I can come up with once the firmware is installed. Another feature is in-camera blending. It kind of looks like multi-exposures. I suppose this is where you can compile a few frames together, and if the background stays static and you've just got some sort of object or person or bird or whatever moving around in the frame, you can actually have multiple versions of them. But as I said, the camera needs to be locked off. The background needs to remain static. In-camera blending, pretty cool. You also now have the option of recording up to 12 different focus locations. I believe that's what it is. So you can use 12 different buttons to have 12 different focus locations stored. Awesome. I mean, I actually haven't counted how many buttons there are on the camera and also how many there are on some lenses, but there's a lot. There's certainly more than 12. And now when reviewing images, and if you do a long burst, and it might be 400 frames long, that's super easy to do now with just holding down the shutter for 20 seconds. You can actually now set it up that when you go to playback, it jumps back to the first image in that set of 400. That makes it way easier than having to push through 400 images. Nice one. There is also new levels of EVF dimming. So if you are in really dark locations, you can actually turn this Z9 EVF, which is very bright, it can also become very, very bright, you can now make it even dimmer than the previous dimmest setting. Try saying that quickly with marbles in your mouth. The previous dimmest setting. Also, you now have the potentiality, like with some other cameras, to turn up the EVF to 120 frames per second. Now, to the best of my understanding, it does use more battery power. So that's up to you. I've used my Z9 now for 3.5 months. I've never gone, oh, I'd like the EVF to be faster. But maybe I'll try it, see what it looks like. So ultimately, the fact that the EVF can change brightness, the fact that you've got 120 frames per second refresh rate, the fact that you can change the dimming to match the outside world more accurately, it really is producing even more of a DSLR type of experience than perhaps we've ever seen before. And I want to thank Ricci in his video for letting us know that you can actually change the camera's high temperature setting. So the warning when it comes on, it can either be set to normal or high. Now, as he said, and I will say the same thing, I've shot with 8K, I've never seen an overheat warning. It's good to know that I can make it go even hotter before it's going to turn itself off, even so it's never turned itself off. But that's just another little tiny little feature here in the firmware 2.0. So now moving over to video, and another thing that Ricci showed us, that if you are shooting in 8K RAW, we've now got 8.3K RAW. So if you shoot in 8.3K RAW, NRAW, so that's Nikon's RAW, at 50 frames per second with a half terabyte card, 512 gigabytes. He showed us you can only get 14 minutes on that card. This gives you a little bit of an idea of what shooting 8K and 8K RAW is all about. And this is using the Nikon RAW 8K, which is a more compressed format than the standard 8K RAW that we would see with, say, ProRes RAW. These are crazy numbers. It's going to be fun. I'm going to need some more hard drives. How about you? Let me know in the comments below. So of course there is the 8K RAW. It is 8.3K, which means you've got a little bit of wriggle room around the edges. And that is using the Interpix codec, which makes this RAW, I believe, around about half the size of, say, ProRes RAW. This is phenomenal, and it's perhaps the headline feature of this new 2.0 update. I'm not sure. There's a lot of interesting things here. It is a ridiculous codec. And because of this increased 8K, we've got a little bit more space around the edges. We can now do 8K DCI, which is a slightly larger version of 8K. It is over 8,000 pixels, whereas the previous one that we've been using, that's still there as well, the standard 8K, that is sub 8,000 pixels wide. Something that a lot of people will be excited about is there is now a waveform that can be included whilst you're shooting video. And you can have a large one or a small one. It's great, it's there, it allows you to see what's going on. One of my personal favorites from this update is the fact that we now have a red box around the edge of the viewfinder when you are recording video, rather than just a single red dot that sits in a single place and can be obscured depending on where you are and what your access to the screen or viewfinder is. This red square just makes it much, much clearer. And it is useful, this sort of thing, because sometimes you accidentally button off when you thought you've buttoned on, and vice versa. Another one of my favorites, because I love to push the boundaries of how cameras work and the logic and the standard ops when it comes to creation, to being a creator. And that is, let's say you're shooting at 25 frames per second. Well, technically you should be shooting double the shutter of that 25 frames per second. So you should be at 50 frames per second. Sometimes I might shoot at 25 for 25, especially if there's no movement in the frame. If you're shooting something static, you can't really tell. Well, now we can go below our frame rate. Let's say you want to double the amount of light coming in. So you want to go to something like a shutter of a 12th for your 25 frames a second. Well, you can do it. You could even go to like 1/5 of a second with your shutter and be recording that still at 25 frames per second. This is something that I am super pumped about, and it is something that I will use. If you look at, say, my 8K Melbourne video here, that would have been amazing for shooting some of those night scenes where there is literally no movement, yet I can capture more light in 8K. And I don't think anybody will know the difference. This is something I'm really looking forward to experimenting with. Plus, there's other creative opportunities there with things blurring in frame. I can't wait to test this out, and it really helps me as a creator and as a cinematographer and someone who loves to just push outside of standard ops. Pumped to have access to that. Thanks, Nikon. That's an awesome one. And another one that comes along with this is also, instead of ISOs moving at 1/3 of a stop, we now have even more fine grain access, and they will be moving at 1/6 of a stop. So I'm super pumped to see that as well, because you do, sometimes you just want to go, oh, I just want to make this slightly darker or slightly lighter. Great to have that flexibility. There also seems to be a little bit of a quick look heads-up display where you can see all the video-related information in just one sort of screen, which is off the I menu. I think that's useful. You know, you can check frame rates and what your sound is doing, all sorts of info here. I think that's useful. It's certainly something that I will be using. Another one that's great for video creatives, cinema creatives, is the fact that you can assign 2 buttons to have 2 different speeds of autofocus change. So this is something that you could go into the menus, dial up and change, but then you'd be stuck on the fast one or stuck on the slow one. Now you have the option to have two, a fast and a slow. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Again, that is something that I will be using every time I shoot. Great. Okay, well there's just some of the high level stuff to come out of the Nikon Z9 2.0 firmware update. It's blowing my mind. I'm super excited about it. I think there is a lot of really interesting things there for both stills photographers and for videographers. We're all getting a bit of something. Wow. Now, I want to talk about this grip. This grip on the back, it has the play button, the menu button, the I button, the zoom in and out. It's got the little joystick, it's got AF, you've got shutter. And then on the front, it's got all of the controls that we have here on the front, plus two of these function buttons as well. Now, I'm super excited about this as someone who is shooting more and more video. The price, I think it's up on Nikon Rumors, is $720 US. So is it worth $1,000? I'm not sure. I'll have to look at it, I'll have to feel it in the hand, I'll have to see what I think. But I certainly think it's a very useful tool. There is an overview of the new Z9 2.0 firmware update, as well as we have the new Z6 II, Z7 II firmwares, 1.4s, check them out, and the new hardware. This is very exciting. It's great to see that Nikon continue to push into these areas. And based on one little comment that Ricci said in his video, he can't wait to see what else is coming for the Z9. So by the sounds of it, it's not stopping here. And for those interested in the Z6 II and the Z7 II updates, well, the fact that these are just 1.4s, I do think there's more to come in that space as well. And I'd love you to let me know in the comments below which feature from the new 2.0 firmware update are you most excited about. It has been so fantastic to see you, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again, so please do share, like, subscribe, and yes, we've been shooting on the Z6 II with the 50mm 1.2. Bye for now.